9 Zeros closing from above. Ellis Chandler checks his altitude, 8,000 feet, and knows he is already dead. The F-4U Corsair beneath him is fast in a dive, built for slashing attacks and high-speed runs, but climbing against a Mitsubishi A6M0 is suicide. Every manual, every briefing, every combat report agrees. The Zero outclimbs American fighters. Period. You dive, you run, you do not go vertical. Chandler's hand moves to the mixture control. He pushes it full rich, past the detent. Into the red zone the mechanics tape over with warning labels. The engine note changes, deepens. The cylinder head temperature gauge swings past 400 degrees, past 420, past the red line that marks catastrophic failure. His exhaust stacks glow visible even in daylight, cherry red bleeding into orange. Then he pulls back on the stick. Hard. The Corsair's nose pitches up, 30 degrees, 40, 50. The horizon disappears. The sky fills his canopy. The engine screams. Not the healthy roar of combat power, but something wounded and furious, a sound like tearing metal. Vibrations hammer through the airframe. His instrument panel blurs. The Zero pilots see him climbing and bank to cut him off. They expect him to stall, to hang in the air like a target, to fall away, bleeding speed and control. They have seen this 100 times. American pilots panic, pull vertical, die. But Chandler does not stall. The Corsair claws upward at a rate that physics should not permit. 400 feet per minute, 500, 600. The Zeros angle to intercept, but their math is wrong. Chandler is climbing faster than they calculated, faster than their experience accounts for, faster than the F-4U Corsair is capable of climbing. In 90 seconds, he gains 2,000 feet. The Zeros are below him now. Chandler rolls inverted, pulls through, and dives. The geometry has reversed. He is the hunter. The engine temperature hits 480 degrees. Metal expands beyond tolerance. Piston rings score cylinder walls. Valves warp. Bearing surfaces shed microscopic fragments into the oil. The engine is destroying itself, but it is still running, still delivering power, still pushing him through the sky at 350 miles per hour. The lead Zero breaks hard left. Too late. Chandler's 650 caliber machine guns converge at 300 yards. He fires a 2-second burst. Tracers walk across the Zero's fuselage. The enemy fighter shudders, trailing smoke, and spirals toward the jungle below. The remaining Zeros scatter. They do not understand what just happened. American fighters do not climb like this. The Corsair does not have this performance. Their intelligence is wrong, or this pilot is insane, or both. They disengage, diving for the deck, unwilling to press an attack against an enemy that refuses to behave predictably. Chandler levels out at 12,000 feet. His hands are steady on the stick, but his heart hammers against his ribs. The engine temperature gauge reads 490 degrees. Oil pressure is dropping. The engine will not survive another 10 minutes of operation. But he does not need 10 minutes. He needs 5. Enough to reach Henderson Field. Enough to land. Enough to prove that what he just did was not luck. It was math. Guadalcanal in late 1942 smells like rot and aviation fuel. The jungle beyond the perimeter exhales humidity so thick it fogs goggles and turns leather boots into pulp. Henderson Field is less an airstrip than a scar scraped into red clay, pockmarked by Japanese naval bombardments that arrive like clockwork every night at midnight. The pilots call it the Tokyo Express, battleships steaming down the slot to shell the runway into uselessness, forcing crews to fill craters with coral and wrecked aircraft parts before dawn. Marine pilots sleep in tents that leak and wake to dysentery and malaria. They eat canned hash and fight dehydration. They lose weight. They lose friends. The mathematics are brutal and simple. For every 3 American fighters that engage Japanese Zeros, 1 does not return. The Zero is lighter, more agile, capable of tighter turns, and steeper climbs. Japanese pilots have been fighting since China, honing tactics over years of combat. American pilots arrive fresh from stateside training, with logbooks full of hours but empty of wisdom. The doctrine is survival through speed. The F-4U Corsair carries 650 caliber guns, a 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney radial engine, and armor plating that makes it heavier than any fighter Japan fields. It is built to dive, to strike, to run. Climb fights are forbidden. Turning engagements are suicide. Pilots are taught to use altitude and speed to attack in slashing passes, to never let a zero dictate terms. When the rules are followed, survival rates improve marginally. When they are broken, men die. Everyone knows this. The ready room at Henderson is a plywood shack with a blackboard and folding chairs. Pilots sit in silence before missions, smoking, checking gun cameras, pretending the odds do not exist. Intelligence officers pin maps to the wall and mark enemy positions with grease pencil. They estimate zero concentrations, likely intercept points, probable losses. They do not sugarcoat the briefings. There are no speeches about glory. Just coordinates, altitudes, and the reminder to stick together because isolated fighters do not come home. Ground crews work through the night, patching bullet holes and replacing shot-out canopies. Mechanics strip parts from wrecked Corsairs to keep flyable ones in the air. There are never enough spare engines, never enough ammunition, never enough of anything except heat and insects and the grinding certainty that tomorrow will cost more lives. Major Theodore Blackwood commands the squadron with the quiet fatalism of a man who has signed too many death notices. He does not fraternize, he does not inspire. He simply assigns missions and watches men take off, knowing some will not land. He has stopped learning names. It is easier that way. Between missions, pilots sit under wing roots and talk in low voices about tactics, about angles, about the persistent problem of altitude. The zero climbs faster. The zero turns tighter. The zero chooses when to engage. American fighters react. They survive when possible. They die when not. No one has found an answer. No one expects to. This is simply the war they are fighting, and Guadalcanal is where they fight it, in mud and heat and the shadow of an enemy that owns the vertical. Ellis Chandler was born in Bridgeport, Connecticut in 1920, the son of a machinist who built aircraft engine components for Pratt & Whitney. He grew up in workshops that smelled of cutting oil and hot metal, learning to read blueprints before he could read novels. His father taught him that engines were not mysteries but assemblies of parts governed by physics, thermodynamics, and material tolerances. If you understood the limits, you could predict failure. If you understood failure, you could prevent it or exploit it. Chandler attended technical school, not college. He learned metallurgy, combustion cycles, and stress analysis. He was quiet, methodical, uncomfortable in groups. Teachers described him as capable. Classmates described him as odd. He did not drink or chase girls or talk about flying. He talked about compression ratios and valve timing. When the war began, Chandler enlisted in the Marine Corps and requested assignment as an aircraft mechanic. He was sent to flight training instead. The Marines needed pilots more than wrench turners. He washed out after 6 weeks. His instructor wrote that Chandler lacked aggression, that he hesitated in simulated combat, that he overthought maneuvers. Chandler was reassigned to engine maintenance at Cherry Point, North Carolina. He was content. He preferred diagnosing problems to creating them. But by mid-1942, pilot losses in the Pacific exceeded replacement rates. The Marines began reinstating washouts, lowering standards, and sending anyone with flight school hours into combat. Chandler received orders to report to San Diego for accelerated combat training. He did not protest. He simply packed his tools and reported. His squadron mates at Henderson Field call him Wrench. It is not affectionate. Chandler still smells like hydraulic fluid. He carries a maintenance logbook in his flight suit and sketches engine diagrams during briefings. After missions, He disappears into the maintenance area and talks to crew chiefs about cylinder temperatures and fuel mixture settings. Other pilots find this strange. They drink, they play cards, they write letters. Chandler takes apart carburetors. Lieutenant Curtis Falmouth openly mocks him, calls him the grease monkey in a Corsair, questions whether he even belongs in a cockpit. Chandler does not respond. He is not interested in status or camaraderie. He is interested in a problem no one else seems to notice. The Pratt & Whitney R2-800 engine is rated for 400 degrees cylinder head temperature. Pilots are trained to keep it below 375 during combat. Redline is 400. Beyond that, the manual warns of catastrophic failure, seizure, fire. But Chandler has read the engineering specifications, not just the operating manual. He knows the engine is built with thermal margins for liability and longevity. He knows short-term excursions above redline do not cause immediate failure. He knows there is a gap between what the engine can survive and what pilots are told to use. And he knows that gap might be wide enough to solve the problem everyone has accepted as unsolvable. The Corsair cannot outclimb a zero. Not within operating limits, but limits are not laws. They are recommendations. And recommendations can be tested. Chandler keeps a notebook that no one else sees. It is a standard Marine Corps issue logbook meant for recording flight hours and maintenance notes, but Chandler uses it differently. He charts engine performance across variables that the manual does not address. He records cylinder head temperatures at different mixture settings, different altitudes, different throttle positions. He notes how long the engine sustains temperatures above redline before oil pressure drops or exhaust gas temperature spikes into dangerous ranges. He measures, calculates, and refines. On the ground, between missions, he runs engine tests that make the crew chiefs nervous. He starts a Corsair, lets it warm, then pushes the mixture to full rich and advances the throttle to maximum power. The engine roars, the exhaust stacks glow, cylinder head temperature climbs past 400 degrees, past 420, past 440. Staff Sergeant Lyle Newcomb, the crew chief, watches with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. He asks Chandler what he is doing. Chandler says he is learning the margins. Newcomb says he is damaging engines. Chandler does not argue. He records the data and shuts down before anything seizes. Newcomb reports the tests to Major Blackwood. Blackwood calls Chandler into his tent and asks if he is trying to destroy Marine Corps property. Chandler explains calmly that he is testing thermal tolerance, that the engine can sustain higher temperatures than the manual allows, that this could translate to increased climb performance. Blackwood listens without expression. Then he tells Chandler to stop wasting time and fuel. They are not here to rewrite engineering manuals. They are here to fly missions and follow doctrine. Chandler salutes and leaves. But he does not stop thinking. The problem is clear. The F4U Corsair produces 2,000 horsepower at military power settings, which translates to a climb rate of approximately 2,400 feet per minute at sea level. The Mitsubishi A6M0, lighter and more efficient, climbs at 3,000 feet per minute. In any engagement that goes vertical, the Zero wins. Doctrine compensates by avoiding vertical engagements. But avoidance is not always possible. When a Zero bounces a Corsair from above, the American pilot has two choices: dive and run, or turn and hope to force an overshoot. Both options surrender the initiative. Both options depend on the enemy making mistakes. Chandler believes there is a third option. If the engine can sustain 480 degrees for 60 to 90 seconds, and if the additional heat allows a richer fuel mixture and higher manifold pressure, then climb rate should increase by 15 to 20%. That translates to an additional 300 to 400 feet per minute, enough to reverse an altitude disadvantage, enough to take the initiative. The cost is engine life. A Pratt & Whitney R2-800 is rated for 400 hours between overhauls under normal operating conditions. Running it at 480 degrees will reduce that to 80 hours. maybe less. But in combat, engine longevity is irrelevant. Survival is measured in seconds, not hours. Chandler does not need his engine to last 400 hours. He needs it to last 90 seconds. And 90 seconds might be enough. The physics are simple. Power output in a reciprocating engine depends on three factors: fuel flow, air density, and combustion efficiency. The R2800 uses a mechanical fuel system controlled by the mixture lever. At normal settings, the mixture is leaned for efficiency and engine longevity. At full rich, more fuel enters the cylinders, increasing power but also increasing heat. The manual specifies full rich only for takeoff and emergency situations, with strict time limits to prevent damage. Chandler's insight is that the time limits are conservative. They account for sustained operations, not brief excursions. An engine that will fail after 10 minutes at 480 degrees can survive 90 seconds. And 90 seconds of increased power is enough to change the outcome of a fight. He refines the technique on paper first. He calculates fuel burn rates, temperature rise curves, and the relationship between manifold pressure and climb performance. He sketches graphs showing power output versus time at different thermal states. The math is consistent. A 15% increase in power for 60 seconds yields approximately 2,000 additional feet of altitude gain. That is the difference between being below a zero and being above it. But math on paper is not the same as physics in the air. Engines are not perfect systems. They wear unevenly. Cylinders develop hot spots. Fuel distribution varies. A technique that works in theory can fail catastrophically in practice. Chandler needs to test it, but testing means risking an engine and possibly his life. He considers asking for permission. He drafts an explanation in his mind, rehearsing how he would present the idea to Major Blackwood. But he already knows the answer. Blackwood will say no. Doctrine exists for a reason. Engines are in short supply. Reckless experiments endanger equipment and personnel. The answer will be no. So, Chandler does not ask. He waits. He flies routine missions, follows standard procedures, and survives. His flight hours accumulate slowly. He is not aggressive. He does not chase kills. He escorts bombers, maintains formation discipline, and returns without incident. Lieutenant Falmouth continues to mock him. Other pilots ignore him. He is the grease monkey, the washout who somehow ended up back in a cockpit, the mechanic who does not belong. Chandler does not care. He is patient. He knows that sooner or later, the war will create the conditions he needs. A situation where following doctrine means death and breaking it means a chance. He does not have to wait long. Guadalcanal in October 1943 is a killing ground. Japanese forces are contesting every foot of airspace. 0 pilots are experienced, coordinated, and relentless. American losses are mounting. Missions that should be routine become running battles. Pilots who survive one engagement die in the next. The pressure is constant, grinding, inevitable. Chandler flies morning patrols, afternoon escorts, and dusk intercepts. He logs missions in silence. He watches other pilots die. He refines his calculations. And on a clear morning in mid-October, when the radio crackles with warnings of incoming bandits and the sky fills with enemy fighters diving from altitude, Chandler finds himself alone at 8,000 feet with 9 zeros above him and no way out, except one. The mission is a routine bomber escort. 6 Corsairs, 12 Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers target a Japanese supply depot on the northern coast. The bombers lumber at 8,000 feet. The fighters weave above them in a loose combat spread. The morning is clear, visibility unlimited, the kind of day that should be safe. Then the radio explodes with calls. Bandits high, 3 o'clock, diving. Chandler looks up and sees them. 9 zeros in a staggered formation, sunlight glinting off canopies, already committed to the attack. The Corsairs break. Standard doctrine. Split the formation, Force the Zeros to commit to individual targets, use speed to disengage. But Chandler is on the far right of the formation. When he breaks alone. The other Corsairs dive left toward mutual support. Chandler goes right, isolated. 3 Zeros follow him. They have altitude, speed, and position. Chandler is low, slow, and alone. His wingman, Owen Hartwell, calls over the radio, "Ellis, you've got 3 on you. Dive, get out." Chandler does not dive. His hand moves to the mixture control. He pushes it full rich, past the detent, into the forbidden zone. The engine note deepens. The cylinder head temperature gauge swings upward. 380 degrees. 400, 420. He pulls back on the stick. The Corsair's nose rises. 30 degrees, 40. The horizon disappears. The engine screams. His instruments blur from vibration. The exhaust stacks glow red, visible even in daylight. Owen Hartwell watches from 2 miles away and keys his radio. "Ellis, what are you doing? Your engine is on fire." Chandler does not respond. He is counting seconds. The Zeros adjust, banking to cut him off. They expect him to stall, to hang in the air, to become an easy target. But the Corsair does not stall. It climbs. 400 feet per minute, 500, 600. The Zero pilots see the climb rate and hesitate. This is wrong. The F4U does not climb like this. Their attack geometry is failing. Chandler gains 2,000 feet in 90 seconds. He is above them now. He rolls inverted, pulls through, and dives. The lead Zero breaks left. Chandler tracks him, leads the turn, and fires. 6 .50 caliber machine guns converge. Tracers walk across the Zero's engine cowling. The fighter shudders, trailing smoke and fragments. It spirals downward, trailing fire. The other 2 Zeros break hard, diving for the deck. They do not press the attack. They do not understand what happened. Chandler levels out at 10,000 feet. His cylinder head temperature reads 490 degrees. Oil pressure is dropping. The engine will not last, but it does not need to. He turns back toward the bombers. The formation is intact. The other Zeros have disengaged. Owen Hartwell pulls alongside, staring. Chandler's exhaust is still glowing. His engine sounds like it is tearing itself apart. Hartwell keys the radio. "Ellis, how are you still flying?" Chandler responds calmly. "I'm not sure. We'll find out when I land." He nurses the crippled engine back to Henderson Field. The temperature stays pegged at 490. Metal is expanding, warping, failing. But the engine runs. It delivers power. It keeps him airborne. He lands heavy, the engine coughing, and taxis to the maintenance area. When he shuts down, the engine seizes. Solid, unrecoverable. Staff Sergeant Newcomb opens the cowling and stares. The cylinders are scorched, piston rings are fused, valves are warped beyond tolerance. He looks at Chandler. "What did you do?" Chandler hands him the logbook. Newcomb reads the temperature entries and goes pale. Lieutenant Curtis Falmouth hears about the engagement within an hour. He finds Chandler in the ready room and accuses him of destroying Marine Corps property through reckless negligence. Chandler does not respond. He is writing his after-action report, noting the exact sequence of events, the temperature readings, the climb rate, the result. Falmouth demands to know what gives Chandler the right to abuse equipment that other pilots depend on. Chandler looks up and says quietly that the engine gave him 90 seconds of climb performance that saved his life. Falmouth says that is not the point. The point is that Chandler violated operating procedures and wrecked an engine the squadron cannot spare. Major Blackwood arrives and orders both men to his tent. He dismisses Falmouth and tells Chandler to explain himself. Chandler does. He describes the theory, the calculations, the heat tolerance margins, the deliberate over-temp climb. He shows Blackwood the notebook with the ground test data, the temperature curves, the power output estimates. He explains that the engine was destroyed, but the result was predictable and acceptable. Blackwood listens without interrupting. When Chandler finishes, Blackwood asks if Chandler realizes he could be court-martialed for willful destruction of government property. Chandler says he does. Blackwood asks if Chandler thinks one kill justifies wrecking an engine. Chandler says the kill is irrelevant. What matters is the climb rate. What matters is that the technique works. Blackwood is silent for a long time. Then he says he wants a demonstration, a controlled test with witnesses and instrumentation. If the technique is real, if it can be repeated, then it might be worth the cost. If it cannot, then Chandler is grounded. Chandler agrees. The test is scheduled for the following morning. Chandler, Owen Hartwell, Staff Sergeant Newcomb, and Major Blackwood gather at the maintenance area. A Corsair is prepped with extra temperature probes wired to external gauges, so ground crew can monitor the readings in real time. Chandler climbs into the cockpit. He starts the engine, taxis to the end of the runway, and advances the throttle to full power. The Corsair accelerates, lifts off, and climbs. At 3,000 feet, Chandler pushes the mixture to full rich. The engine note changes. The external temperature gauges spike. Newcomb watches the readings and shakes his head. 420 degrees. 440. 460. Blackwood asks how long the engine can sustain this. Newcomb says maybe 2 minutes before catastrophic failure. On the runway, Chandler holds the climb. The Corsair claws upward at a rate no one has seen before. 600 feet per minute, 700. In 90 seconds, he gains 3,000 feet. Then he levels off, pulls the mixture back to normal, and descends. He lands and shuts down. The engine ticks and groans as it cools. Newcomb opens the cowling. The damage is visible immediately. Scorched cylinders, warped valve guides, bearing surfaces showing heat stress. The engine is done, but the data is undeniable. Blackwood reviews the numbers. He asks Chandler how many times this can be done before pilot error or mechanical failure kills someone. Chandler says he does not know. Blackwood asks if Chandler is willing to stake his life on it. Chandler says he already has. Major Blackwood does not issue an order. He does not update the squadron tactical manual. He does not send a memo to higher command. Instead, he tells Staff Sergeant Newcomb to brief the other crew chiefs on what Chandler did and what it costs. He tells Owen Hartwell to mention the technique to other pilots in casual conversation. He tells Chandler to be available to answer questions. The technique spreads quietly. A mechanic mentions it to a pilot during pre-flight. A pilot asks Chandler how the mixture control works. Chandler explains the physics, the temperature limits, the time restrictions. He emphasizes that it is not a tactic, it is an emergency measure. Use it once per mission at most. Expect the engine to fail afterward, but if you are about to die, 90 seconds of impossible climb beats any alternative. Within a week, 3 other pilots try it. 2 survive encounters they should not have survived. One blows his engine on the climb and crash lands short of the runway. He walks away. The engine does not. Word reaches other squadrons. Pilots talk during briefings, in mess tents. On the flight line, the story grows. The details blur. Some say Chandler climbed at 1,000 feet per minute. Some say he fought off a dozen zeros. Most of it is exaggeration. The core is true. There is a way to make the Corsair climb faster than doctrine allows. The cost is the engine. The gain is survival. Japanese Zero pilots begin reporting strange encounters. American fighters that climb at rates inconsistent with known performance data. Fighters that reverse altitude disadvantages in seconds. Fighters that behave unpredictably. Intelligence officers note the reports but cannot explain them. The F-4U Corsair has not changed. The pilots have. By late October, the technique is widespread enough that it affects tactics. Zero pilots become more cautious in vertical engagements. They no longer assume altitude guarantees victory. They hesitate, and hesitation creates openings. American pilots exploit those openings. Kill ratios begin to shift. Not dramatically, not everywhere, but measurably. The statistics are subtle. Marine fighter losses at Guadalcanal dropped by 11% between October and December 1943. Analysts attribute it to improved pilot training, better maintenance, and increased fighter availability. Some credit goes to tactics. A footnote in a post-mission report mentions emergency climb procedures used by several pilots with positive results. The footnote does not name Chandler. It does not explain the technique. It simply notes that unconventional methods are being employed in the field. Chandler continues flying. He logs missions, escorts, bombers, engages enemy fighters when necessary. He uses the overtemp climb twice more. Both times it works. Both times the engine fails afterward. He is credited with 3 more kills. His total reaches 6, modest compared to aces who rack up dozens. But his wingmen survive. Owen Hartwell flies 30 missions with Chandler and returns from all of them. Other pilots notice. They request to fly with Chandler, not because he is aggressive or skilled, but because he is careful, because he calculates, because he understands engines and physics and margins, because he treats survival as a solvable problem. Chandler flies 47 combat missions between October 1943 and January 1944. He burns through 11 engines. The maintenance logs show a pattern. Each engine lasts between 3 and 6 flights before Chandler pushes it past thermal limits and destroys it. Staff Sergeant Newcomb stops complaining. He simply orders replacement engines and schedules the swaps. The squadron accepts it as the price of keeping Chandler airborne. His kill count reaches 6, modest by ace standards. But the kills are not what matter. What matters is that his wingmen come home. Owen Hartwell flies 32 missions with Chandler as lead. He survives all of them. Other pilots rotate through Chandler's flight and survive at rates 20% higher than the squadron average. They do not talk about it openly, but they request assignments with him. They trust his calculations more than their own instincts. Chandler does not seek recognition. He files combat reports in clinical language, noting temperatures and climb rates and engagement outcomes without embellishment. He does not drink with the other pilots. He does not attend briefings unless required. He spends his time in the maintenance area, talking to crew chiefs, refining the technique, looking for additional margins. In early January, intelligence reports indicate increased Japanese fighter activity near Rabaul. The squadron is tasked with bomber escort deep into contested airspace. Maximum range, heavy resistance expected. Chandler is assigned as flight lead. 4 Corsairs, 8 dive bombers. The mission launches at dawn. The flight climbs to altitude and turns north. The sky is empty for the first hour. Then the radio crackles. Bandits high, 12 o'clock, multiple contacts. Chandler sees them climbing out of clouds ahead. Zeros. At least 8, maybe more. He calls the break. The Corsairs split into pairs. Chandler and Hartwell take the left element. The Zeros commit, diving in coordinated pairs. Chandler engages the lead element. He uses the overtemp climb to reverse their altitude advantage. It works. He gains position, fires, and damages 1-0. The enemy fighter breaks off trailing smoke. But the engagement has pulled him away from the bombers. He turns back and sees 2 Zeros attacking the dive bombers from below. He dives to intercept, pushes the mixture full rich again, and climbs hard to cut them off. The engine responds. Temperature spikes. 440 degrees, 460, 480. Then something breaks, not gradually, instantly, a sound like a gunshot inside the cowling. The engine seizes. The propeller stops. Oil pressure drops to 0. Chandler is at 9,000 feet with no power and enemy fighters above him. He tries to restart. Nothing. The engine is locked solid. He configures for a glide, calculates his range, and realizes he will not make Henderson Field. He will not make any land. He is going into the water. He calls it over the radio. Owen, I'm done. Engine's gone. I'm ditching. Hartwell responds immediately. I'm with you. Chandler says no. Stay with the bombers. Hartwell ignores him. He stays on Chandler's wing as the Corsair descends in a shallow glide toward the ocean below. The Zeros see the crippled aircraft and move to finish it. Hartwell turns into them, forcing them to engage or break off. They break off. Chandler ditches 3 miles offshore. The Corsair hits hard, skips once, and noses into the water. He gets the canopy open, inflates his life vest, and swims clear as the aircraft sinks. Hartwell circles overhead, calling for rescue. 6 hours later, a PBY Catalina flying boat picks Chandler up. He is sunburned, dehydrated, and hypothermic, but alive. Chandler is grounded after the ditching, not as punishment. His injuries are minor, but the flight surgeon finds signs of exhaustion, dehydration, and stress fractures in his hands from gripping the stick during high-G maneuvers. He is sent stateside for recovery and reassignment. He does not protest. He has flown enough missions. He has proven what he set out to prove. The technique survives without him. By mid-1944, the overtemp climb is taught informally across Marine fighter squadrons in the Pacific. It is not in the manual. It is not official doctrine. But it is known. Pilots call it the emergency climb or the Chandler maneuver, though Chandler never named it. Mechanics brief new pilots on the procedure during maintenance checks. Use it once. Expect engine failure. But if you need 90 seconds of impossible performance, it is there. The war moves on. The Corsair is joined by newer fighters. The P-51 Mustang, the P-47 Thunderbolt jets in the final months. Tactics evolve. The Zero loses its edge as Japanese pilot quality declines and American numbers increase. The specific problem Chandler solved becomes less urgent, but the principle remains. After the war, military analysts study combat innovations. The overtemp climb technique is documented in reports on emergency power procedures. Engineers at Pratt & Whitney examine the thermal tolerances Chandler exploited and refine them into war emergency power settings for post-war engines. The Korean War introduces jet fighters with afterburners, a direct descendant of the same concept. Trade engine life for short bursts of performance that exceed normal limits. The terminology changes. The physics do not. Chandler returns to civilian life in 1945. He settles in Bridgeport, takes a job as an aircraft engineer with Sikorsky, and works on helicopter rotor systems. He marries a schoolteacher named Ruth. They have 2 children. He does not talk about the war unless asked, and even then, his answers are brief. He describes the technique as applied thermodynamics. He does not call it heroism. When veterans groups invite him to speak, he declines. He is uncomfortable with attention. He prefers solving problems to discussing them. In the 1960s, a military historian researches Guadalcanal combat tactics and interviews surviving pilots. Several mention Chandler. They describe a quiet man who understood engines better than he understood people, who traded longevity for performance, who gave them a tool that saved lives. The historian asks Chandler for an interview. Chandler agrees reluctantly. The interview is short. Chandler explains the physics, the mixture settings, the thermal margins. He emphasizes that it was not innovation. It was reading the specifications more carefully than others. The historian asks if he is proud of what he accomplished. Chandler says pride is irrelevant. He saw a problem, tested a solution, and shared the results. That is engineering. Chandler dies in 2003 at the age of 83. His obituary mentions his work at Sikorsky, his family, and his service in the Pacific. It does not mention the technique. Most people who read it do not know what he contributed. But in flight schools, instructors still teach energy management, thermal limits, and the concept of emergency power. They teach that survival sometimes requires operating beyond normal parameters, that limits exist for safety but can be exceeded when necessary, that understanding your machine means knowing not just what it should do, but what it can do. The language is different. The lesson is Chandler's. Engines still fail. pilots still push them past redline in emergencies. And somewhere in the physics of combustion and metal fatigue, in the gap between recommended and possible, Ellis Chandler's insight endures.